In this video, we're going to review the book Break Free from OCD. I'm Chris from the Leeds Anxiety Clinic. I've got my colleague Chris here with me as well.
Hello.
So, Break Free from OCD, it's a book. Who's it for? That's a good place to start.
It's aimed at the general reader. Obviously, you'd have to be an OCD sufferer to find the material interesting. It's not actually aimed at professionals or practitioners. I use it in my work with clients because it's very accessible. I can hand a copy over to the client and they can go away and read it in their own time, and then we can debate, discuss and apply some of the things that they've read about in that book.
Yeah, so you don't need to be an expert in OCD, you don't need to know much, you can go in.
No, and you don't need to be in therapy. A lot of the clients that I've worked with have had the Break Free from OCD on their bookshelf at home for a number of years. And in fact, when I mention the book, at least 50% of the clients I've worked with say, I've already got it. The question is, why haven't they read it? Why haven't they followed the principles within it? And why haven't they broken free from OCD?
Yeah, good questions, and we'll definitely get into some of that discussion around self-help versus working with a therapist.
Yeah.
So what's in the book? Like, what if I'm just picking up for the first time, what can I expect to be in there?
Yeah, the first thing that it's going to describe is what OCD is. There's a lot of stereotyping around cleaning, ordering, and people being obsessive about having neatness or things a certain way, or people needing things to be clean. I think that's the fairly common misconception about what OCD is. Certainly there's a subset of OCD where people have contamination OCD and they do clean excessively as their compulsion. But basically the book will outline that OCD is the response that we have to intrusive thoughts. What we think they mean, what we think we need to do in response to them, and the book outlines that it's not the intrusive thought that's the problem, it's the compulsion that we develop in response to those intrusive thoughts that actually takes up the time and causes the disability, if you like, that goes along with OCD.
Yeah, so it's going to explain, I guess, what's going on inside people's heads so they can understand themselves a bit better, and then maybe offer them some solutions as to what to do about that.
Yeah. It's actually light on the practical how-to. It's not an instruction manual. It gives people the outline of how to think differently about their intrusive thoughts, but it doesn't have extensive exercises about habituation and repetition of better ideas. What I tend to find is I work with patients around the first 5 chapters, which basically outline what an intrusive thought is, what OCD is, how it comes to become developed and how it becomes entrenched, how there then becomes a very pernicious feedback loop where the client often finds themselves engaging in a compulsion to try to remove the intrusive thought, but it's that compulsion that ends up becoming more problematic and causes the situation to become entrenched. And then there's actually my favourite chapter is chapter 5, which gives you a really good example of a reframing exercise. Here's what you think the problem you have is. Here's what the problem actually is. Where's the evidence that it's that problem? Where's the evidence that it's that? And it sort of goes through in a structured way so that by the time you finish the book, you feel differently about what the problem is. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, no, sounds really useful.
As a therapist, I would like there to be some work left for me to do. So actually one of the reasons that I personally really like the Break Free from OCD is it's really good at reframing the problem, but then it does leave me some work to do as the therapist in what to actually do differently about it. I suspect that's probably the reason why a lot of the clients who have had it on their bookshelves have looked to it for a how-to and actually found it's lacking a little bit in that respect. it's great for making you think and feel differently about what your problem is, but it is not so hot at fixing the problem. And I think the reason for that is OCD is a very, very, very difficult problem to convince people to think differently about. So if you produced a how-to manual, unless you knew that the client was really ready to tolerate the discomfort of experimenting with doing it differently, the how-to manual would also be sat on the shelf next to the Break Free from OCD untouched.
Yeah, so it gives people that understanding of what's going on, but then the actual making changes and making those improvements are just really hard.
Yeah, because you're debating. This is the thing that I've noticed about working with the book and working with clients. I'm basically a disciple of Salkovskis, Challacombe and Bream, Oldfield, who wrote the Break Free from OCD edition that we're talking about today. And yeah, you don't just read it one time. The reason why it's really good to read it with a therapist is because they'll come in and clients will come in and argue with me about it. They'll debate with me. Yes, but what if? And yes, but I'm different because no, I don't do this. I do this. And so in a way, there's a structure to how OCD works that's very difficult to translate into English because it's actually a way that people approach their problem rather than the actual problem itself.
So if people are coming into it and they're reading the book and it's kind of mostly fitting, but they're thinking, oh, this isn't quite me, this isn't quite hitting it, is that a symptom of the complexity of OCD, or is that it's just impossible to write a book to cover the range of OCD that people might encounter, or is it just the book hasn't quite nailed it? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, okay, so I'm potentially going to get myself stuck in some weeds here. Let me try and explain what I think is going on. The OCD inventory, which is the 42-point Likert scale questionnaire about symptoms.
So that's a form that your therapist might get you to fill out when you go.
Yeah, you can fill them in online. I sometimes share an online version that the clients can do if they don't want to fill in the back of the book. But there's a paper version of it at the end of chapter 1, and it basically gives you 4 options or 5 options for how much you've been distressed by any of the following over the last couple of weeks. And so it's very much I think from the literature, it's 80% reliable, which means it correlates with, there's a more complicated 90-minute psychologist interview that will assess the style of thinking and the style of problem solving, which is a much more reliable indicator of whether somebody is obsessive and compulsive. And when they've compared the OCD inventory at the end of chapter 1 with the people who then had that more complicated, detailed psychologist interview, there's an 80% correlation between the people who were shown to have OCD by the 42-point Likert scale versus the more complicated psychologist interview. So, it's not 100% reliable, far from it. One of the difficulties I think with it is that it labels the behaviours that OCD sufferers are likely to engage in as being evidence that they have OCD. So if I have a, blushing disorder because I'm socially anxious, and you use blushing as a way of determining whether I'm socially anxious, you're looking at the outcome, the behaviour that a lot of people who are socially anxious have as a byproduct, and you're using that as proof that they have that disorder in the first place. It's very unreliable because I might be blushing for all sorts of reasons, not necessarily linked to social anxiety. And in fact, a lot of people that have crippling social anxiety will never blush.
Yep.
But because it correlates, it's a quick and easy way to ask somebody, do you blush? But it's not, it's actually missing the point that social anxiety is a beliefs and behaviours problem. It's not a physiological flushing problem. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
So at the end of chapter 1, the questionnaire there will ask you lots of things about hoarding and lots of things about thinking and lots of things about compulsively engaging in things like checking doors and windows and gas and whatever, but more because they are symptoms of rather than what's fundamentally happening when somebody's obsessive and compulsive.
Which is the ways of thinking that you could analyse as a practitioner.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's really important that we don't just ask clients to say, are you checking the door 50 times before you're able to leave the house? Yes. Okay, so you must have OCD then, because that's not normal. Yeah. What we're going to get you to do is practice recognising that you don't need to check the door before you leave the house. So we're going to get you to do a form of exposure therapy whereby you will practice not engaging in that locking behaviour. And as you tolerate that discomfort of walking away having not checked the door, you will build a resilience, and then you will not have checking OCD anymore. I think it's much more compassionate to help change the beliefs that the client has about why they feel compelled to check.
Yeah.
And help them understand that they don't have a door problem. They have a obsessive brain problem.
Yeah.
They think they're trying to solve the problem of how they keep their house from getting burgled. But what they're actually doing is, what their actual problem is, I have a brain that anything I care about, like my house getting burgled, gives me intrusive thoughts about that thing coming true, and then makes me think it's my responsibility to become 100% sure that that thing does not come true. So I don't really have a door problem or a burglar problem. I have an obsessive brain problem.
Yeah.
And next year, if I solve my door problem this year, then next year I might be coming back to you because I've got a what if I hurt my kids problem.
And that's the thing that the book misses?
No, that's the thing that the book really describes well.
Right.
But it doesn't give you the how to.
Right.
Doesn't give you the mechanical process of how to do it. It also, I think it probably underestimates how likely it is that this problem is going to shift onto something else.
Yeah.
You know, I've lost count of the number of clients who've come to me with a form of OCD that they want to. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the ever fine slicing all the different types of OCD, relationship OCD, paedophile OCD, you know, as though they were separate disorders.
Yeah.
And then a client comes and they want treatment for their paedophile OCD or their relationship OCD or whatever it is. And I immediately, I hope not too lacking in compassion, encourage them to think about they don't have I might be a paedophile problem. I have a brain that asks me anything I really, really care about not being burgled, a paedophile, killing a cyclist, you know, being incompetent in the workplace. I have a brain that at various points in my life is likely to ask myself, is this biggest fear of yours true? This year it might be, am I a paedophile? But next year it might be, am I incompetent in the workplace? Am I going to cause people to die? Am I going to kill a cyclist in my car?
Yeah.
So if you read Breakthrough from OCD, it can almost give you the impression that you have one form of OCD. So the Sue's is a checking. Let me make sure I've got these the right way around. Johnson is the religiosity OCD who's worried about his thoughts might be blasphemous. We've got...
So we're talking about characters in the book here that are used to describe various alleged subtypes of OCD.
Yes, yeah. Do you know what? I'm not going to go through them because I'm not going to remember their names. I'm going to embarrass myself. But there's a religiosity, checking, that harm. There's one that's worried about harming his kids, and there's one that is, I can't remember what the other one is. Never mind.
Yeah, so these can give quite good descriptions of what people might be feeling, but also lead to the idea that the problem is more specific than maybe we would want to suggest as practitioners.
Yeah, there's a really good way that you can think about OCD, which is that it is a thinking problem. If I walk down the street and I think about Burger King and I visualize a Big Mac, hang on, I'm getting my restaurants mixed up. If I walk down the street and I'm thinking about Burger King and I think about a flame grilled Whopper, if I imagine a flame grilled Whopper, you'd think that means I'm hungry. I like flame grilled Whoppers. I'm probably going to buy a flame grilled Whopper. You'd think that my chances of engaging in flame grilled Whopper eating within the next hour would be significantly higher if I've just thought about a flame grilled Whopper. That's how intrusive thoughts get misappropriated, misprocessed by people who have obsessive compulsive disorder. They will think, what if I just killed a cyclist? Or they will think a nappy advert comes on. What if I like this kid? What if I'm attracted to kids? Or they will leave the house, try to remember whether they locked the door or not be able to remember whether they locked the door or not, and think that must be telling them they didn't lock the door, as though there is a higher chance that something is going to come true because I'm thinking about it. Well, that's not relationship OCD or paedophile OCD or whatever. That's OCD.
Yeah.
The fact that it happens to be that I think about, oh no, what if there's a nappy advert, this bunch of adverts? What if there's a nappy advert? What if I then start having intrusive thoughts about kids? Oh my God, I've got this thing called paedophile OCD.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's OCD. I could just as easily leave the house and the thought could pop into my head, what if I've been irresponsible and I haven't locked the door? It's no different. I would treat that thought like it might have some data or it might be telling me something true. It's actually just my unconscious telling me what I don't want to be true, what my fears are. So the book's good at, to make your point, the book's good at describing manifestations of OCD as though that were the only problem.
Right. Yeah.
But what I try to help clients recognize in my own work is they have a deeper issue, which the book is very good at identifying as the cause of paedophile OCD or relationship OCD or whatever. But it doesn't make the point clear enough that that's the problem. And it might shift to something else next year.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we talked about what we like about the book, where maybe the book's shortcomings are, but who should buy the book? Like, who should just go buy the book? Who should maybe seek out a therapist to work with? How does someone at home thinking maybe they've just been diagnosed with OCD or noticed that they're developing OCD tendencies, where do they go? Do they start with the book? Do they work with a therapist?
Yeah, I guess it depends. Are you a reader? Would be a good first question. What's your history like of taking information from books? Are you somebody who will start a book, finish a book, and be able to concentrate and get a lot from it? Or are you somebody who is not a book reader? If you're somebody who has a track record of amassing information from books, then go buy a copy of it and see how far you get. What I find is, I'm repeating myself for good reason, what I find is a lot of clients need help being convinced that what's written applies to them and is really true. So if you think about any books that you've read this year, I bet you've only read them one time.
Yep.
And I bet you've pretty much taken all you're going to get from it, from that one reading. You don't go back and reread it 4, 5, 6 times.
No.
Because you think you're going to believe it a lot more the second, third, fourth, fifth and sixth time. What you do is you go, you read it. It either fits in some ways with what you already know about the world, or it doesn't, in which case you reject the bits that don't fit with your current worldview. You're a bright guy. I know you like to investigate and you like to reflect, but you're still human. You're still going to get the diminishing returns of not wanting to read it a second and third time and decide that your time's best spent doing something else. If you're going to read a book like Break Free from OCD, I would be thinking 6 times is the number of times you are going to get the most value out of reading it. You're going to get more value from it the more convinced you become by the arguments presented within it. And that just does not happen from a first reading.
Yeah.
So actually, one of the things that I do in my work with clients is we debate, we review, we use examples, we go back over their experience. And one of my jobs as a therapist is to refer back to the text and help the client see that 2 weeks ago when they were trying to engage in an avoidance because they were trying to avoid having an intrusive thought, when we then reading back through and we're talking about the compulsions, one of which is avoidance, it's a really useful thing for me as the therapist to be able to say, 2 weeks ago we were talking about you not wanting to go to the supermarket because it triggers those kinds of thoughts. 4 weeks ago we were talking about not wanting to see that friend because that experience you had triggered lots of these intrusive thoughts. Can you see that you really fit this model of you have an intrusive thought, you feel really distressed by it, so therefore you learn not that you need to change how you feel about the intrusive thought, but that you want to avoid situations where you feel that distress. Can you see how that might fit together? And so it's my job as the therapist to help the client develop confidence in Salkovskis, Challacombe and Bream Oldfield's research. It's good clinical evidence-based research, hence the reason why I'm following their lead. If I can help the client reframe their problem using what's described in the book, then they're going to be happier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, it's a strangled metaphor and I'm not too happy using it, but think about the Bible and think about a priest. The Bible is the text, the priest is the salesperson, the person who refers back to, tells stories from it, and basically uses the human connection that all humans value and crave and seek to engage in, and effectively smuggles in Salkovskis, Challacombe and Bream Oldfield's dry text as though, and remember, the good book saith, I don't know, it feels like there's a version of that going on sometimes. I'm the disciple of Salkovskis, Challacombe and Bream Oldfield. They're the PhDs who've done all the fancy evidence-based research, peer-reviewed journals. They're the intellectual academics. They've proven that this stuff works. As the therapist, it's my job to have the relationship with the client and keep touching base with the evidence base that shows that their lived experience will be significantly better if they can reframe the problem in this evidence-based, proven way.
Yeah, so we're saying on a kind of scale of we've got our self-help gurus over here and we've got our evidence-based academia over here. We like this book a lot because it's more towards this end. It's got a lot of real hard evidence in an accessible way.
Yeah, 100%.
And if someone is looking for a book on OCD, then this is a great place to start.
Yes.
But if they find they're not getting, the book isn't really helping them make changes, at that point they probably want to take those ideas to a therapist and work in them in more depth.
Yeah, I mean, you're a self-taught guy. You've taught yourself a lot of things over the years that I've known you. You strike me as the sort of person that could get a book, rip every piece of information out of it and go and apply it yourself and actually make changes based on your interpretation of a good book. If you're that kind of person, then you're gonna go great guns with Breakthrough from OCD, because it's going to really help you feel significantly differently about what the problem is. If you're not that much of a self-starter and you're struggling to make sense of what your OCD is, and you've tried reading Breakthrough from OCD, but it all just seemed a little bit hard to apply to your own problem, then maybe that's where a therapist can be really helpful. Either because you're finding it difficult to tolerate the work or because you're finding it difficult to believe it. So I think a good therapist can help make it more accessible, and like I say, we're primitive hunter-gatherers at heart with old brains that respond emotionally to situations, and one of the best things to help you face a new problem is having another human being come on that journey with you. If it's a very intellectual problem, you may feel comfortable getting all the information you need from a book, and it's a great book. But you might not want to do that on your own. You might want a human there, to come on the journey with you and actually go through that process with you. And in that case, I think a therapist can not only add some technical understanding and some application, but you're not on your own. This is a tough problem. It's a very unpleasant problem to face. Having someone kind and compassionate who knows the landscape on your team can probably be a really helpful thing to go through.
Yeah, and one of the difficulties that people have probably found is that even if they are self-starters, it's one thing learning Spanish and getting Duolingo and being motivated to go on that every day. But when we're talking about facing some of our darkest fears, there's a lot more resistance there, and it may be that the therapist is more required in those situations, because it's just really hard, even if you have that internal motivation. When you're facing these tough problems, it's never easy to want to go do that yourself.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the book is not going to have a regular appointment with you at 10 a.m. every Tuesday. And the book is not going to very kindly lean forward and ask you, how did your reading go this week? Or how did that experiment go this week? Or what did you think about the conversation we had in our session last week? The book is just going to sit there quietly for 12 months or 24 months or 36 months. And, the average number of years that clients have had Breakthrough from OCD sat on their shelves is north of 1. I meet clients who've had, copies of this sat on the bookshelf for 5 years, and they've it's been on their to-do list to do something about it.
Yeah. So final thoughts, we're saying we like the book a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
Well worth giving it a go, given it's the cost of a book.
Yeah.
But if clients if people aren't finding that value, then a therapist could help them
100%
move down that journey.
Yeah, definitely.
There you go. Hope you found this useful. If so, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you want more information about anxiety and OCD, then hit that subscribe button, because we would love to see you in another video.